President Biden's $1.9 trillion relief bill is headed back to the House after scraping by the Senate this weekend. When signed, the bill will renew unemployment programs set to expire 1 week from Sunday. It is also expected to provide funding for schools, testing and vaccination efforts, as well as relief for several industries crippled by the pandemic. For more, I want to bring in Marc Fisher. He is a senior editor at the Washington Post. Marc, good to have you. The bill itself is over 600 pages. So what should our viewers really understand about this latest version of the bill?
Well, first of all, it's huge, as the 600 pages would imply. It's $1.9 trillion. That's as much as the government spent to dig us out of the entire recession back in 2008, 2009, and that was over several years. What the Biden people learned from that lesson was if you want to go big, you need to go big fast. And the other huge difference between this stimulus and the two we saw during the Trump administration is that this money is going overwhelmingly to individuals, to low and middle income families, whereas the previous ones, a big chunk of that went to businesses. And the Biden package steers away from payments to businesses because they felt that in those first two bills, the money didn't really trickle down to individual workers the way the Trump administration had hoped it would. And so this time the money is going directly to consumers with the hopes that those low and middle income families will not only be able to pay their rent and buy food, but will do other spending as well that will stimulate the economy. The theory is that the high income folks, they're already spending at the level they're going to because they haven't been affected nearly as harshly as low and middle income families.
I want to talk to you, Marc, more about those small business owners. But first, let's just talk about the bill itself getting its final passage. The Senate version of the bill strips out some of what was in the House version. Now that it's back in the House, do you see any problems getting final passage and as quickly as President Biden would like to see it?
No, it looks like it's going to go through very quickly. There are certainly some House members, particularly on the left side of the Democratic Party, who are unhappy that the increase in the minimum wage was stripped out of the bill that they had passed on the House side. And so that will be a fight for another day. But they're not going to hold up this whole package just for that reason. So it's going to go through very quickly. The government seems to think they're going to be able to get checks out sometime this month. And that is something that they think is really important because there are somewhere between a quarter and a half of low and middle income Americans have been unable to make their rent or mortgage payments.
I know people are watching that timing on those checks, especially. Let's go ahead and dig a little bit deeper into small businesses, because small business owners, as you know, have been ravaged by the pandemic. What kind of relief can they expect from this bill?
Well, they're going to get the individual kinds of relief that we talked about, the direct checks, as well as tax credits of childcare and those kinds of things. They're going to see that their workers it'll be easier for them to come back to work with the assistance with childcare. In addition to which, there is more of the kind of payments we saw the first time around in direct payments to small businesses, just not the payments to big businesses nearly as much as in that first package. So it's a different strategy to some extent, but the idea is to save those small businesses. The idea is to get Americans back to work. Of course, Republicans push back and say you're giving people a disincentive to go back to work because you're extending those unemployment benefits through to September. But the Democrats point to research showing that these payments have not indeed held people back from going to work. They want to go back to work. They just haven't been able to because the restaurants aren't open. The other businesses haven't staffed up to the levels that they were at, and so on.
So let's shift gears from small businesses and start talking about Wall Street. How has Wall Street reacted to the news?
Well, I think there's some unhappiness that more of the money is going to individuals rather than to large businesses, the way they did in the previous package. But in general, there's been support from much of the financial establishment for the idea that another stimulus is sorely needed. There's some concern, obviously, about the size of this. There have been some questions about whether this could unleash an inflationary spiral of some sort. And you have economists and researchers on both sides of that issue. Obviously, with an expenditure of this size, it knocks another enormous hole in the deficit. But that's been going on now for quite some time, and the Federal Reserve seems largely okay with this and wants to move ahead and get that stimulus going to get the economy moving and to get millions of Americans back to work.
So, in terms of those relief checks, is there anything that people need to do to get those checks?
Well, as with the previous payments, it's supposed to be automatic. That doesn't mean that it necessarily will be. Most people do get those
Right.
checks automatically. And then for those who don't, you can check with the government and see on the website whether it's through Social Security or the IRS what the status of your check is. And there have been some holes and some lags in that, but the last two times around, they did manage to get the money out in fairly short order. The expectation is they'll be able to do that again.
All right. Marc Fisher, thank you so much for joining.
Good to be with you.